It was good, everybody. I'm going to be introducing you today to something called the Psalm 82 LXX argument for Christ, or in other words, the Psalm 82 Septuagint argument for Christ. Because the reality is, if you study ancient Israel and a lot of things popping off in that time, there's a lot of things that point to Christ, Yeshua, as the Messiah. Now, that's very interesting to study. So we're going to start off with Psalm 82, verse 8. It says, "Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit the nations." Now, the context of this passage is that there are Elohim, spiritual beings, who are acting wickedly throughout the nations. So the psalmist, the writer, is looking forward to the time when God will inherit all nations. Now, this is why the apostles get excited when Christ, this is why the apostles get excited to exclaim Christ. And why Paul in Ephesians 3 can say things like, "So that through the church the manifold wisdom of God might now be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly places." What are these? These are territorial spirit beings, the same beings of Psalm 82, essentially. So what is Paul saying? This is when we get to Christ, it comes full circle, because there are these evil spiritual beings that have territorial associations. They're acting wickedly. The psalm looks forward to when God will reclaim the nations. Now the apostles, convinced of Jesus raising from the dead, are proclaiming him. And for the first time in history, you have mass numbers of pagan cultures leaving their pagan religions, whatever gods they are worshiping, coming back to the Most High, who incarnated in Yeshua. They're coming back to the Most High through Yeshua, the Messiah that the apostles are proclaiming. So in their minds, through Christ, through what they're saying, their God is reclaiming this territory that was once used to worship pagan gods. So that's something that's it's really interesting. That's something we got to take into consideration. What I'll say is this. That was just a side note. If you look at the facts of history, for the first time you have non-Hebrew cultures coming to worship the God of Israel. Objectively, starting with the Roman Empire and then throughout the centuries, because of Yeshua, because of this Messiah, because of this Messianic movement. Now that's the first thing to think if you're considering these things and you're considering the way and you're considering that there really is a God, what happened in history. This God, as the Old Testament speaks, would come to be worshipped throughout all these nations and all these continents, while as these other gods would cease being worshipped, and idolatry and all these things would decrease throughout the centuries. That's important to understand. Number two, this is the crux of the argument. If you go into the Septuagint, the way it translates the word arise, it uses the word anaistemi. Anaistemi. That's the Greek word for rise. So, by the way, the Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Bible, of the Old Testament, that they used the majority of the time in the New Testament. Other Jews were familiar with it. It was like the common translation of the day. Now, what's interesting about the word anaistemi is that it's the same word used for resurrection 30 times in the New Testament. The other word, I believe, is engoyer or engoimai or something like that. But anaistemi, rising, carries the word carries the connotation of resurrection from the dead. That's its chief symbolic significance. And we see the apostles, Luke, use it when they're speaking about the resurrection of Christ. Let me go to Acts 2:32. This Jesus, Acts 2:32, God raised up, and of that we are all witnesses. These apostles are claiming to be witnesses to the resurrection of the Messiah. What's the Greek word he uses? Anaistemi. Anaistemi, folks. The same word used in Psalm 22. So think of it like this. If I said, "Rise, O God, judge the earth, judge the nations." When I say rise, we know it has different connotations. It can mean getting up like this, or it can mean a resurrection from the dead, right? That connotation is possible. It can refer to both things, and the Greek word is used for both things when you compare the Old Testament and the New Testament. So what does this all mean? If we take the word arise in Psalm 82 to carry the connotation of resurrect, which I think is warranted, even merely from the Old Testament, because we have this whole thing of a suffering servant, and I believe the resurrection is implicit in Isaiah 53. So we're cross-referencing some scriptures here. if we take arise to mean resurrect, imagine how transformative this psalm becomes when you look at it in the Septuagint. Arise, resurrect, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations. These pagan nations, worshiping these pagan gods, these spiritual beings who are doing evil, they're not caring for these people, they're leading them into idolatry. You will inherit these nations, Lord. Let's look at the apostles and let's look at Yeshua. They believed he was the Messiah. They believed he was the cloud rider revealed to Israel. I made a couple videos where I talked about this. That was significant in ancient Israel. The cloud rider, even apart from Christ, was acknowledged to be a manifestation of God's presence, a Yahweh figure, so to speak. So when Christ applies it to himself, he's saying, I'm that figure of Daniel's vision. I am. This is how the apostles could believe that Jesus was Yahweh, Yahrevave, because they believed he was this cloud rider revealed to Israel. So by believing that Yeshua was the cloud rider of Israel, and believing that he resurrected, and that God the Father had vindicated him by resurrecting him, the worship of God spread throughout the whole world. In this way, God did inherit all the nations. Objectively speaking, the worship of God increased around the whole world. People left their pantheons for the Most High through Christ. Number one, and for a perspective that acknowledges the existence of other gods, you have to say God did inherit these nations because these spiritual beings cease being worshipped. The Most High increases the amount of worshippers of his name, those who are coming on the name of the Lord and being saved. That's increasing throughout history. It's interesting to think about, yeah. There's a reason why these other gods, whether they be Greek, Egyptian, Roman, there's a reason why en masse they stopped being worshipped, and why the God of the Hebrews, who at one point you would be scarce to find other cultures outside of the Hebrews worshiping him exclusively, why that is now true for billions of people in the world. God spoke these things through the prophets and the Psalms, and they've come to pass. Let me reiterate this one more time. Arise, resurrect, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit the nations. The apostles believed Christ was the cloud rider. They believed he resurrected. It's through this belief that Yahweh, Yahrevave, the ancestral God of the Israelites, began to be preached around the whole wide world. And that's something true no matter how you want to slice it. You've got to acknowledge that as a matter of history. So, I pray that God will use this as a blessing. I pray y'all would actually think about this. I pray y'all watch it to the end because there's a lot of gems here. Like I said, when we look at ancient Israel specifically, there are a couple of unique arguments and unique things that really point to Christ as the Messiah. Because when we are familiarize ourselves with that culture, we actually see how smart and intelligent the apostles were when they would use both the scriptures and contemporary traditions to point to who Jesus was. Alright, y'all be blessed in the Messiah. Catch you in the next one.